Welcome to the podcast that's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist, the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee, and this is clearly a very different podcast than normal. So if you're looking at it right now, you'll probably see us Brady bunched around on the screen on YouTube. But if you're listening to this, we also may sound a bit different because we're not in our studio. We are actually all from home due to the viral outbreak, but we still want to get you the podcast here. So we have our head coach, Chad Timmerman. How you doing?
Hi, everybody. I'm doing well, thanks.
Cool. We have our CEO, Nate Pearson.
Hello.
And because of the power of the internet and all of us being remote, we also have Amber Pierce. What's up, Amber?
Hey, guys.
This is lemonade out of lemons, right?
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. It's a good thing that comes from it. So we are going to answer more of the cycling and triathlon related questions that you submit. You do so every week at trainerroad.com/podcast. Keep doing that. It's awesome, and we sincerely appreciate it. It's really cool. And a couple things, you can also join us on YouTube. It's not live right now. We may find a way to make this live while we're remote. We may not. But regardless, you can watch this on YouTube. And if you are watching it on YouTube, you should absolutely go down there and give us a thumbs up on the video right now if you're watching, because that will help us a bunch. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss the videos, because we have a video every single day that's coming out, whether it's race analysis or some sort of tips. Tons of great content on there. So you should do that if you're not doing it. And also, if you're listening on a podcast app, you can subscribe on the podcast app. So then that way you don't miss episodes, because a lot of you just kind of jump in and find it. If you subscribe, it makes it a whole lot easier. So with all of that said, Nate, we should probably just kind of like set the scene and explain things for folks, right?
Well, one thing, we are remote, so we're probably going to talk over each other a little bit and interrupt on accident. So I know that we know that bugs a lot of you, but we're going to do our best. Second thing is, we understand this is a really, really serious event. And I'm sure we're going to be lighthearted in this episode, but we know that people are dying and that sort of thing. So I just want to let you know that we understand that. And that's why we shut down the office and everyone's working from home and we're doing this remote and quarantining. You see me in the office of TrainerRoad, but it's shut down to everyone else. So it's kind of like a bigger house for me, which is nice to get away from the kids, because working at home with kids, as probably all of you are experiencing, is really, really hard. The next thing I want to talk about is, we're not giving any advice about the coronavirus because it is, one, we're not qualified to. I don't even want to point to other videos. Today's March 19th, I think. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Things are moving so fast that information that we give to you and people listen to this podcast many times in the future might be outdated. So the advice I'm going to give to you is look at the CDC, the World WHO, can't even say it, World Health Organization, and your local governments for information. We'll still give you I think we're going to talk about some dry land swimming and how to rebuild your plan and all this sort of thing, things that we are experts in that are evergreen. But other than that, we're not going to answer those or point to any resources. Please just look them up yourself, up to date and live. Hope everyone understands that.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most responsible approach. We'll keep talking about how to adjust your training from where you're at, and then, of course, how to get faster, because we know that plenty of folks that are listening to this are still in a situation where they're able to train in some regard. So we definitely want to help with that still. So that's the whole kind of goal behind this. First things first, though, Nate, you were in Sydney, and we didn't really get to talk about that. But how did everything go in Sydney? I saw you did one race, right?
Well, they just closed their borders too, so I'm glad I got out. So I went down there and I did Heffron Park Crit, and it was a disaster. The course is really, 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 really cool. I wish we had this course. It would be so interesting. John, this is your course. It's all about cornering, short power. There was a super, super heavy headwind, which was on the finishing straight, which was very unique for this time of year or for that course. Usually it's crosswind there. But that allowed for part of the course to have a huge tailwind where attacks could happen. So I raced A grade, which was the top grade. 2 Pro Conti guys went off, boom, right in the gun. I was like, oh, should I go? I wasn't feeling so well. Had some drinks the night before, but I stopped at midnight thinking that 3 p.m. would be okay. It wasn't. We're going through, we're racing, a small race, 10 people. It was kind of bad weather, and I guess Tuesday night's the big night. This was a Saturday. We're going, and these guys are working together to pull them back, but I'm not feeling good at all. And thinking, if I pull, I'm going to pop myself off the back. I did 1 or 2 weak pulls, really not doing work. I went in the rotation, and then someone else left a hole. So I would have to do 2 pulls, and rightly so. He was like, well, you're not doing pulls, so I'm going to give you an extra one. And I said, I can't do it. If you don't do it, like, I'm not going to get back on. And he thought I was like messing with him. So I just get in his wheel and we just both drop back. And I'm like, dude, I'm not messing with you. And and then like half a lap later, I dropped out of the race. I was like so bad. I don't know if it's jet lag. Amber, does jet lag affect you when you change time zones like that?
Yeah, definitely. I'm laughing because I'm remembering one year we went down to race the Tour of New Zealand, and I was racing with Shelley Olds at the time, and I was trying to get her. It was bad. Like, we were all just feeling terrible, and it was just a really hilly race. And there was one point I was trying to bridge her up to the next group up the road, and it was like they were right there. I mean, we were within 5 meters of the back of the group, and I was just dying. I literally turned around her in the most pathetic, pitiful voice and was like, help me. It was really bad. I feel you. It can really, really, really impact you big time.
So on that race, I only survived 20 minutes, but I only did 300 normalized, which for me is not much, especially at sea level. So it's kind of like anticlimactic, kind of like the 40K where I didn't get to like perform. And then the next day I did the TR group ride, which was amazing. Like, everyone there was so cool. It was super fun for me to meet everyone. The roads, it was raining, and it was still like top 3 rides of my life. The roads were like,
Nate does not like to ride in the rain.
No, it was rain and cold. It stopped, but the roads were like perfectly smooth. Like, we saw so many riders with, even though it was raining, the roads were still packed, at least for Reno. And they were like, if it was a clear day, it would be really, really packed. They were complaining about the roads, and they're pointing stuff out, which would just be like regular roads in Reno, right? Like, because they had like really nice roads, and there'd be a little crack. And they're like, watch out for the crack. But just, in Northern California, it would be considered a good road where the crack is.
Yeah.
Anyways, on that one, we did a climb where we went all out, and I did 4:17 for 8 minutes, like a day later. So my fitness definitely popped back up. If I could do 4:17 for 8, that means I could probably do way more than 30 or for 300 watts for 20 minutes. That was really frustrating because it doesn't matter. I don't know if you guys ever had that where you have the best fitness in your group rides rather than races. That is very annoying. Then I was going to race on Tuesday night at like this raceway thing, and I was all stoked for that. I was carb loading, and then I had diarrhea. So
no.
And I don't think it's from the carb loading. The other guy
fell apart real fast.
And I had really tired. Part of that might have been the jet lag, but the guy that I was with, he wasn't carb loading, but we had all the same restaurants. He also had diarrhea. And then so we did that. And then the event that I got there for, when we landed, I was checking in the hotel and it got canceled because of COVID-19. So
that was a business event that you were there for.
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
it was a local one. The local people put on some learning stuff, and I did get some cool stuff out of that. But basically, the week was kind of a bust. Went to go race again, or to ride again, but it was felt like 40 degrees and raining, and we decided just to have breakfast instead of riding. I didn't have a bike pump. I had a backpack on, nowhere to put it. It was pretty bad. And then I got sick 2 days after I came back. Better now, but who knows what I have. You can't get tested here in Reno unless you have 101.4 temperature, and I don't have it. So might as well treat myself like I am. It's probably just a cold, but like I have it. And then that allows other people to have tests. And so far I'm fine.
That's a good segue, Nate. We should talk about a blog post that was just recently published on our blog that's helpful for this sort of scenario that almost everybody listening to this probably finds themselves in, which is really like what happens once your races have been canceled. So there's a blog post called How to Adjust for Canceled Events. And if you go to blog.trainerroad.com, you can see it up there. Or if you just search for TrainerRoad blog, that's probably the best spot to find it there too. So with that said, it talks about how to adjust your training, how with rescheduled events, or if it's in the near term or in the long term, or if you just have canceled events, how to manage that, and then also a plan builder. But I wanted to go through a couple of those scenarios really quick. So first things first, I think most of us here have had our events canceled. I mean, Amber, you're enjoying the fruits of retirement right now. So
yeah.
But you still had a lot of events that you were probably not training for necessarily, but you still had a lot of them that were canceled.
Yeah, big time.
So in the blog post that we have up there, when we talk about the canceled events and how to adjust for that and what to do, really it comes down to there's kind of the actual mechanics of it. how to move things around on your training plan. There's the motivation aspect of things. And then there's also the opportunity that you have that kind of ties in with both of them to kind of flip things on their head and change things up. So I think first things first, if you're using Plan Builder and then you delete an event off your calendar, Plan Builder, it'll actually ask you, do you want to recalculate your plan? And it'll recalculate it for you, which is really cool. If you have to batch delete a bunch of races off of your calendar, you don't have to recalculate every time. You can delete, and then you'll get that notification if you want to recalculate each time. And then you can just recalculate on the last one, for example, and then it'll build it all out for you. I think the big question a lot of people have, though, is what if I don't have an event, right? Because there just isn't one on the calendar. And I'm curious to see what your guys' opinions are on this. But like one of the things that I would have done, or that I am doing, I should say, because I don't think national championships will happen in, late or very early July. We'll see. And assuming those don't happen, I'm personally deciding to still peak around that period of time. I'm okay with it. If racing gets back into the swing of things a month or two later, that's okay. I think that I'll actually experience quite a lot of benefit from going all the way through the process of going up to a peak and then dropping down, especially because chances are, I don't think that things would be rescheduled on that level, later on in the year. It would be really tough just with how busy the calendar will be.
And I'm taking roughly the same approach because Masters Nationals isn't until the very end of July, but I'm still training. I'm getting over a bit of illness as well, so I'm trying to get back on track, but I am still training as though it's going to take place. I mean, you have to be prepared for it. It's not something that's been taken off the calendar yet. It may stay exactly where it is, and if I haven't done my work in time for it, then that's on me.
I was peaking for Tour of America's Dairyland, which I'm pretty sure is not going to happen. That was in early June. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to delete my plan, start over, and peak for Nationals. I don't think that's going to happen. But like you said, I should know like a month ahead of time. And I can decide then based on motivation, do I want to go through specialty or do I want to start over again? Because sometimes specialty is like super fun. And sometimes I might think of, this is going to be over by, I don't know, October and I should peak for Kona. Right there.
See, that's a good approach too, because if you bring your fitness up to, what's effectively 90% of where you can get, and we find out 4 weeks in advance that the event is still taking place as scheduled, 4 weeks is enough time to drum up that last 10%.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One thing with this too is if your event has been canceled, I guess a different approach that you can take too is like, let's say you are a crit racer, but you are a really good long bomb style crit racer, right? Like, so the sort of athlete that like breakaways work really well, but short repeatable efforts are always the ones that end up putting you on the back foot. This is a good opportunity for you to kind of become the athlete that you've always wanted to be, so to speak. And you can kind of spend some time, like basically right now, if I was in that situation, what I would do is I would change things up and just put a fictional race on my calendar that's a criterium and put it within, 8 weeks or so of where I'm at. And I would double down on that criterium specialty phase, right? Or you can do something in the opposite. If you really want to be a steady state athlete, then you can build towards something like that. It's kind of a fun time to, because there's no event pressure on your calendar, you can really just train as you wish, which is pretty cool. But the one thing I would say is having structure to adhere to, especially when we're talking about like quarantining and everything else, having that structure is going to be really helpful. But then also, this is a great opportunity for a lot of people to be able to be possibly more focused than they have been with their training as well. Just less interruptions, probably less contact with people. I know, Nate, you mentioned kids earlier. With our kids, like now that my son isn't going to school right now, I'm thinking like, this is amazing. I'm never going to get sick again. Probably won't be the case, but but it's probably an opportunity to get in really focused, structured training.
I think people coming out of this, there's going to be two groups. One group that like, the TR people who are like, wow, I have no travel. I'm not going to get sick because I'm not in touch with everyone. And they're just going to execute on their workout and they're not going out to eat and they can like choose their food and they're eating like this whole foods and stuff. And the other group who's kind of super stressed out. They're not training. They're eating poorly, like pizza rolls or something like that because they're stressed out. Because it's right when you get stressed, you eat a lot. It's a lot easier to eat more poorly. They're going to come out of this with a little change in body composition and not be as fast. So I would say our listeners, unless you race in Northern California, you should be that first group, 30 to they're 35 plus.
Your second description there was describing my retired life. Let's dial it back a notch with you.
Amber, it's okay. You've already put in the KJs. All of us who are still trying to go up, you can live the civilian life.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot to be said just for maintaining that structure and routine right now, especially now. It can just be so grounding mentally and emotionally just to have some structure that you can just rely on right now.
Yeah. I was even thinking about on my calendar, if you really want to be crazy, if you're a cyclist, no one has to know about it right now. You could put Kona on your calendar or something like that, and you could train like a triathlete for a while. This is your time to be able to do these sort of things. It's really kind of like a free license that you can, the necessity is structure, but you can pick whatever that needs to be.
John, I just have to address the elephant in the room. Everyone wants you to get that guitar down and shred.
So, yeah,
I want to hear you play Wonderwall.
Exactly. I think that may be one of the only songs I can play. That thing's
I knew it. I didn't even know that you could play it, but I knew it.
Yeah, that thing's practically aesthetic at this point. Simon, my 3-year-old son, plays it, which basically means he smashes it all the time. So, one other thing that I want to, which I guess once more hitting on this, since we are live from home or wherever we are, you're probably going to hear kids or dogs. You might even see us pointing to each other on the screen, trying to make the dialogue more clear, all this stuff. So getting behind the scenes raw look at how this is all going. So one question, Amber, and I'm so excited we have you on here because before you were a cyclist, you were a very high level swimmer. A bunch of people, triathletes, are asking, my pool is closed. I don't have a spot to swim. What should I do to keep up my swim training while we're going through this whole process?
Amber, too, say your swim background so everyone knows.
So I swam for Stanford back in the day. So I was a scholarship athlete there on the D1 program.
And Stanford's one of the best in the nation, right?
Yeah. It's one of the top level NC2A programs.
Didn't you win a bunch of state championships too?
Yeah, I did. I won state championships, national championships, set state and national records, and then went to Stanford on scholarship for swimming.
This is why I have to pull this out of her, right? She's like, yeah, I used to swim, and I got a national championship in high school, just so you know. And paid for Stanford, one of the best schools in the country at swimming and academics, and they gave me a full ride. Cool.
Yeah, pretty impressive, man. So Amber,
but listen to her.
Yeah, seriously, she knows what she's doing. Amber, what should we do in this case if you can't swim in water? How would you suggest that people keep up on this?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is don't stress too hard about this. This is, whether or not you can swim is not going to be the most important thing right now. But there are some things that you can do to kind of mitigate some of that specific swimming fitness loss. Most of us are, especially with the training program, and especially if you're a triathlete and you're trying to train 3 different sports, you're trying to use your time effectively, right? So you're trying to devote all of your training time to really sport specific work, and not being able to do that right now with swimming is a tough thing. But there are some things that you can do to mitigate that. So first thing is, don't panic. There's a lot you can do. And I think the 2 core things as far as fitness goes are to focus on maintaining strength in key muscle groups. So with swimming, that would be core, lats, triceps, hip flexors, quads, with big emphasis on core. And then the second thing you can do is to maintain just a general aerobic conditioning with cross training. When I was at Stanford, we did a ton of dryland work. I hated dryland. We did so much dryland work. But one of the things that we did during dryland was we actually did spinning classes. We had spin bikes next to the pool, and we would lead spin sessions in the morning before morning practice. So there's a lot to be said for conditioning with cross training. So don't stress too much about that stuff. I think there's a lot that you can do to sort of stave off swim specific loss. This is kind of a fun extra. I went back through my notes from when I was swimming at Stanford, and I have them here. We've scanned them, and so producer Tucker's going to have those available to you guys. They're super, super geeky, but it's really fun. And I do want to just take a second and talk about some of this, because I think it's an interesting way of thinking about swimming. And this ties into some of the things that you can do on dry land even just in your living room to work on your swimming. So there's three main things that you can do right now, especially with dryland work. One is to work on your mobility. And I really, really like Kelly Starrett's approach to mobility. It's not just about range of motion. It's not just about, can you, put your shoulder into this position or not? It's about, can you access that position with strength and control? So if you are weak or vulnerable in the end range of your range of motion, that end range isn't useful to you at all. And as a swimmer, you really want to have good shoulder mobility, which means you want to be able to access as many positions with your shoulders and arms as you can, but actually have strength and control in those. Chad, you've done a lot of stuff with the Kelly Starrett style training. Is there anything you want to add here?
Not at this point. I think your points are super salient. And I do like that he pushes the point that it's not just about being able to maintain the range of motion so much as be strong. I mean, actually have usable strength through that entire range.
Yeah. When I was in high school, I used to do like crazy shoulder stretches, and I would do a lot of passive stretches. And it wasn't until I got to college and was really revamping my swim technique that I realized that, it was great that I had these hypermobile shoulders, but it ended up being problematic to the point where I had to get shoulder surgery because my right shoulder was actually so hypermobile that the head of the humerus bone in the shoulder capsule was unstable. And so it was sort of like rattling around in there in a way that was causing a lot of problems. So cautionary tale there. But the point is that you can do a lot right now at home, just working on shoulder mobility, scapular mobility. You can YouTube a lot of this, just do a YouTube search on those things. But mobility is a really good one. And again, it's not just about stretching and getting into weird range of motion positions. It's about learning how to strengthen those positions, learning how to access those with a lot of control. The second thing that you can do, big picture, is work on stability. And this is really related to the mobility, right? Can you access those positions and be stable in those positions, have strength and control to achieve that stability? So that's another one that is really specific to swimming. One of the things that we used to work on with dryland all the time was posture. And I think this is a really interesting one, and it's really key for swimming and not something that anybody, I don't know how much this gets emphasized anymore these days. And to be fair, everything that I'm saying is a little bit dated. But I think that it's really relevant. So one of the things in my notes, you'll see a little sketch of a rubber raft and a kayak. One of the things that happens to us when we get in the water is we did not evolve to hang out in the water. We evolved on dry land in gravity, right? So our bodies are evolved to respond to gravity, to moving in gravity. So when you look at the curvature of the spine, it looks a lot like a spring because it's designed to absorb the impact as we walk. It's absorbing this vertical impact as a spring. And that's a really great design for when you're walking upright in gravity. When you're in the water, it's a totally different environment. You don't need that spring to absorb anything. The other thing that happens when you get in the water is because it's a foreign environment, your brain kind of goes haywire. You can't eat, you can't breathe naturally the way that you normally do. You feel very, very unstable. You don't have the orienting sensation of gravity. You don't have ground under your feet. So the combination of unfamiliarity and instability and effect on breathing kind of causes your limbic system, that more primitive part of your brain, to freak out, to put it in really scientific terms.
I feel that every time I get in the water.
Right. And this is one of the biggest things. I honestly, it's just huge. And even if you're mildly uncomfortable in the water, even if it's not something that you're so panicked you can't swim, like even if you're mildly uncomfortable in the water, or you don't feel at ease breathing when you're swimming, those are things that are going to make it more difficult for you to actually focus on technique in the water. And technique in the water is hugely, hugely important, as we know. So getting back to kayak and rubber raft, one of the things that our brain does when we get in the water to counteract this freak out is to seek stability. That's the first thing your brain is going to do. It's going to seek stability in air. And so when you're in the water, seeking stability looks like becoming a rubber raft. And that is you basically want to flatten out and spread out, right? And become this rubber raft. But if you compare a rubber raft to a kayak, we know that a kayak is significantly faster than a rubber raft, but it's also significantly less stable. So our natural instinct to achieve stability, because we're not comfortable with that instability in the water, actually makes us slower. If you can get comfortable with the instability of the water and become a kayak, you can be a lot faster. I had the great honor of working with two brilliant minds in swimming, Milt Nelms and Bill Boomer, who were I think this stuff was still relatively new at the time I was getting to work with them, but they were looking at swimming in a really different way. And they were looking at it not about force production, and strength and all of these things. They were looking at it like, what's actually happening? What's actually happening when the body gets in the water and interacts in this totally foreign environment? And they were looking at it not just in terms of physiology, but they were also looking at it in terms of physics. What are the physics and interactions between the body and the water? What is your internal state? So that limbic system response. And then, also what is your shape in the water? And so one of the things Bill Boomer used to say was, first you create the shape. And then that's the first step in swimming, is to create the shape. It's less about the strength, but you want to learn how to create the right shape. And so you don't want to be the rubber raft, you want to be the kayak. And becoming a kayak means totally changing your body configuration for the water in a way that's very different from being on land. So going back to your spine as a spring on land, when you're in the water, you want your spine to be a kayak. You don't need to have those spring-like curves in your spine. You want your spine to actually be quite a bit straighter, more like an arrow in a kayak than you would on land, as an example. So one of the things we used to do is we used to practice what we called the aquatic posture in dry land. And it's something it's a lot about body awareness. It's really subtle stuff. So a really basic way of feeling this is if you lay on the ground and you just lay on your back normally. For most of us, the small of your back is going to be, there'll be a little bit of a space between the ground and the small of your back. And that's part of that spring-like curvature of the spine that, again, it's designed for absorbing impact and gravity. But when you're, say, in a freestyle position, you want to be that kayak. And that doesn't involve flattening out. That involves being really, really straight. So as you lie on your back, tilting your pelvis forward really gently with as little effort as you possibly can to just feel the small of your back touching the ground, imprinting the ground, not with a ton of pressure, just enough to feel that space goes away. Now your back is a little bit straighter. And then you want to sort of lengthen your neck a little bit. So just feel like from the very top of your head, there's a string pulling your head straight up. And now your spine is a lot straighter than it would be just walking around normally. And you want to just feel that sensation. What does it take? You pull your rib cage down a little bit toward your belly button. You're pulling your pelvis up a little bit. And just what are the sensations there? And you can use gravity and being on land to kind of strengthen that proprioceptive feedback, to feel the difference between having that curvy spring-like spine and having that really kind of rigid, straight kayak spine that you would want in swimming. And then once you kind of get a hang of that on your back, you can try it on your side and work your obliques a little bit and feel how well your core can balance in that straighter configuration. And then we would actually stand up on 2 feet, just on the deck, and you would stand there and you would try to pull your pelvis forward, pull your rib cage down a little bit, get your spine nice and straight. And you would try to hold that. And again, going back to this idea that your limbic system kind of freaks out in the water, one of the things we used to do is what they called chaos training. It sounds funny, but I kind of feel like that's what we're all doing right now anyway.
Yeah, that's called swimming for me.
Right. Yeah, it's like when we're training, I mean, and this applies for everything, right? Like when we're training, you're doing intervals. There's a lot of structure. We sort of know what to expect. We establish predictable patterns, and these are all good things. But then on race day, anything can go wrong. Your nerves are heightened. There's a lot more there are just so many more elements involved that we're not used to having to manage in training. And so training, quote unquote, that chaos can be really, really helpful, right? It trains your limbic system to be a little bit more comfortable with unpredictability and instability. So we would stand on the deck, have your aquatic posture nice and firm, and then we would try to push each other over. So as I would stand there with my posture, my teammates would push me forward, back, side to side, and in ways that were not predictable. So it wasn't like they're just going to keep pushing me from the right side and I would fight against it. They would just push me all different directions, and I would try to maintain that posture and stay stable without falling over, without using my arms, without using my legs, but only using my core. And then we would translate that to the water by getting in and doing what we called pencil floats, where you would just float vertically in the water. You would put your spine into aquatic posture and you would just float like a pencil with your arms at your sides as long as you could. And inevitably, like within seconds, you become really, really unstable and you start to kind of tilt one way or the other. And the goal is to fight that tilt and fight the instability with only your core. This is surprisingly difficult to do. But again, it's really, really subtle. And I think that part of, the subtlety in swimming, if you think about it, like when we're on the bike, you're pushing against a platform, which is a pedal, and you're generating huge watts, right? But in
some
the pool,
of us, yeah. some more than others.
It's all relative.
Yeah.
We can all be heroes in our own minds.
Exactly. Yeah.
But in swimming, you don't have to generate that much force. In fact, you can't. Like the more force you try to generate because you're moving through a fluid, it's not necessarily going to be productive. One of the things Bill Boomer and Milton Elms really got across, which I thought was brilliant, was when you're swimming, you basically have an impulse and a space, and then you have the next impulse. So you have these spaces between impulses. And one of the better analogies I remember Bill using was, think of it as like cross-country skiing. So you have an impulse pushing off one ski, and then the space is the glide. And then you have an impulse pushing off the next ski, and then you have the space as the glide. In the pool, you have an impulse, which is you're anchoring, in freestyle we'll say, you're anchoring one hand in the water while you're swinging the other arm over the top. And then you have the space is the space between the impulse of the anchor and then the glide forward. So with swimming, it's less about, you don't have a platform where you're just, creating tons of pressure or tons of force. It's only a couple pounds of force that you need to generate the impulse. What makes a swimmer faster is how well they utilize the space between the impulses. So what shape are you in when you're gliding? Are you a rubber raft or are you a kayak? The more like a kayak you are, the more distance you're going to get in that glide. And in swimming, we like to refer to that as your distance per stroke. But if you imagine this, the impulse is never going to be like, you're never going to get to like a 600 watt impulse. It's just, even if you could, it's not necessarily going to help you. What's going to help you is creating the right shapes and making the most of the space between the impulses. And the other interesting thing about swimming is the impulse always comes from your core. You might think that it's coming from your lat, but it's really, you're steering with your hips and your core. So in freestyle and backstroke, you can think of it, these are the long axis strokes. So the impulse is, you're flipping from side to side with your hips. If you imagine the kayak, if you're in freestyle, you want to mostly be on your side. You almost never want to be on your stomach. And you're driving that rotation from your hips, not from your shoulders, not from your arms. So the impulse to throw your arm over the top of the water is coming from your core. The impulse to anchor the other hand under the water as you're doing that is coming from your core. These are all things that you can train out of the water, which is the cool thing. So you can work on this aquatic posture, you can work on impulse training, you can work on chaos training, you can work on, and the more you work on just simple postural exercises like this, the more you'll have a proprioceptive body awareness that will translate to the water, so that when you do get back in the water and start working on technique, you'll have a better body awareness and you'll be better able to start making some of these changes.
This is interesting because I feel like if you think about it with cycling, a lot of the times it's hard to break down everything that your body is doing and should be doing when you are in the midst of pedaling, right? Like it's tough to do it. So that's why we do cross training. That's why we do plenty of other things. That's why we do pedal stroke drills, that sort of stuff, when that environment is more controlled for, lower power, or, just less complexity in the workouts earlier in the season. Those sort of fundamentals are huge. We just went deep on swimming.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. It makes me it makes me want to swim. Firstly, I can't wait to do that. And also, Amber's going to be my coach.
Yeah.
And I'm going to pay her so that she can't coach you two, which will be nice.
I actually do pay her already.
I know.
So.
Dang it.
Amber, what about just body weight exercises, pull-ups? Do you guys do any of those?
Oh yeah, those two.
So what did you do?
Oh, geez. Okay, so we would do tons of medicine ball stuff. We did lots of rope climb stuff. We did a lot of Vasa trainer stuff. But interestingly, on the Vasa trainer, what we used the Vasa trainer for was to train the impulse. So we weren't necessarily, using it as an erg per se. It was more about doing kind of isometric contractions where you were trying to generate force through the arm that was originating in the core. And then we would do your standard pull-ups too, which is super fun.
A Vasa trainer, for those that don't know, is basically it's a hybrid rowing machine that's made to simulate swimming. Lay on your stomach, have these things that attach to your hands. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see. And then you can't really emulate the swimming stroke because your torso can't rotate. So it would probably be really bad on your shoulders if you tried to do that.
Right.
But the intent, Amber, right, is, and like you said, you're using it for a specific purpose, but the intent is to work on a lot of the muscles when we're talking about that pulling back that you do with the swim stroke, right?
Yeah, you could use it to just really shred your lats, honestly, which you can do at home with, any kind of, if you have TRX, if you have just like rubber bands that you can tie, why is that term escaping me right now? I don't know. But there's a lot you can do, again, to train these specific muscle groups. So your deltoids and your lats, all of those kind of stabilize your shoulder muscles. So everybody who swims tends to overlook doing basic shoulder external and internal rotation work because it's really boring and not very much fun, but it's really, really good for you and keeps your shoulders really healthy. So there's a lot you can do there.
Chad and Amber, here's what am I thinking for at-home dry land swim training on a budget. You could get the bands off Amazon. Those are really cheap, like $8, and do some of the rotation stuff that you talked about. You could do the postural stuff that you talked about, which is free. Do core work, which I think you can just do with yourself and feet under a couch or something. And then the final one is you could get one of those doorway pull-up things. Those are they're pretty cheap. I think like $20. But without having to buy a whole gym, you could get those and just work on your pull-ups, both pull-ups and chin-ups, I would think, because why not? You probably have extra upper body work to, extra, I'm not going to say recovery time, but you could put more stress on your upper body because if that's all you have. What do you think about that, you two?
Even something like hanging rows. So if you want, rather than an overhead pull, if you want to do more of a horizontal pull, you can just take a wooden dowel in between two chairs. It's pretty basic, but it does the job quite well.
Yeah. You can make yourself really, really sore doing body weight stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's strap systems that you can get for really cheap now too, whether it's Amazon or anything else like that. So if you don't have something where you can mount up on a door where you can mount some sort of chin-up bar, you can use those strap systems and they can usually hook up to any door that you have. And like you said, Chad, you can kind of do inclining rows or whatever else you need to. That it's pretty flexible.
There's a lot of, and they're all cropping up now, of course, on YouTube. But there's a lot of DIY sort of fixes for bodyweight exercises and slightly enhanced bodyweight exercises.
Yeah,
Supermans are another really good one too, just for your chain and scapular mobilization.
That's like the exercise you're talking about when you just lay on the ground and then from your position prone on the ground, extend your arms and your legs out and lift them slightly off the ground. Is that right?
Yeah. Cool. So you're on your stomach and then you can do, I call them, I's, T's, and Y's. So you make the shape of an I with your hands up by your ears and try to lift those. And again, it's just a subtle impulse, but just lifting for 10, 15, 20 repeats until you feel a good burn, and then make the shape of a Y. So then you're arms are a little bit out wider, and then you do a T where they're out at 90 degrees from your body. And those are really good.
The IYTs are good. And then when you're in that Superman position, you can actually, it's called swimming, where you alternate left leg, right leg raise, and then alternate back and forth, which is a bit of a contralateral movement, which is, similar to swimming.
Yeah. Are we talking like a big left, right leg movement, Chad, or are these
No, it doesn't have to be. All you're trying to do is activate, muscles on the posterior chain, really, and they don't have a big range of motion.
These, do you think these would be bad for cyclists?
No.
Not at all.
Right?
No, I think they address specific places that cyclists neglect, or the cycling posture neglects.
Yeah.
Cycling posture is a funny word, period.
I got it right here.
It's just a really nice way of saying terrible posture.
Yeah. It's kind of funny, like whenever I see them talking about like phone posture and how bad phone posture is for everybody, I'm like, he looks super arrow. Like, it's a different way to look at it. This is awesome. Is there anything else that we want to discuss on the swimming side of things? Amber, Chad, Nate, anybody?
Well, I saw Amber touch on open water swims. So
yeah, I mean if you have access, that might. You could still be social distancing and swimming across a lake.
Absolutely, pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I think I just want to circle back on the don't freak out right now. I mean, it's really tough to get thrown out of your training routine, and it can really feel like a setback, but this is an opportunity, maybe even an opportunity to just slow down and do a little bit less. And I'm not saying, get lazy, but it can actually really help your training to take some time to de-stress, which is a little bit hard to do right now. Probably for most of us, it's a very stressful time. But sometimes doing less can actually be more. And, if you think about professional athletes, we get to do the specific training. So if all you're doing is training, you can go out and do a 5-hour bike ride and then come home and do all of the supplemental work on range of motion, stability. That's a real luxury as an athlete who's training full time. Most of the folks listening to this don't have that luxury. But right now, if you're not able to go to the pool and do that specific training, this is a time that you can explore this stuff and just, get into it and see what you can learn, about your body, see how well you can train better body awareness with this time. So I don't know, it's you don't usually have time to do stuff like this. So this might be a fun time to get into it and just see how it affects you.
I feel like there's two camps here. One where this is like a very stressful situation at home with the kids all day, like push and pull. And that, Amber, I think if you're regularly doing 90-minute workouts, maybe this is the time to start doing hour workouts or 45-minute workouts to be consistent and a little bit less. Then there's the other group. Maybe you don't have kids. You're like, 90 minutes of my commute is taken off. Like, I get to eat at home and this isn't really a huge deal. I have all this extra energy. And maybe for them, you could do that supplemental or maybe try a little bit more volume, like play with it, right? Like it's easy to overdo it. You don't want to overdo it for sure. But it's definitely, I think it's polarized. You're either like stressed out or like, I have so much energy and I need to do stuff and I have so much extra time.
Yeah. Well, if you do have extra time, there's a lot more in my notes that you can take a look at. I think Tucker's going to be posting those. So,
what episode is this, Jonathan, in the forum?
Episode 251. So you can go to TrainerRoad.com/forum and you can check it out there. Or just search for the forum or TrainerRoad forum. You can find it. One pro tip on the forum, by the way, at least on my phone and on my iPad, you can save it and it looks like an app on my screen. It's a pretty sweet thing to have because I just have it right there all the time. So then I can tap in and check it out.
Another pro tip is the forum has a dark mode. I think we should make this default. But if you click into your preferences, there's a check mark for dark mode. And like using it at night, it's a lifesaver.
Yes.
Lifesaver. My son always says lightsaber for that. And I start to say it like...
We're having a lot of time with our kids right now. Let's get into Lee's question. He says, hey guys, I love who you are and what you do. Mega props. Thanks, Lee. Appreciate it. I think we all know who this Lee is, by the way. He says, here's my crazy question. I have a sense that I should be doing intervals of various intensities and lengths. For me, as a general purpose but gravity-ish mountain biker, I think the intervals might look like 5 seconds all out, 30 seconds, 1 minute, and 3 to 5 minutes. But what if I did one interval to rule them all? I like that. It says start at full power, fade to 30-second power, hang on for 60-second power, and just suffer for the rest of the 3 to 5 minutes. My wattage would start as high as I can make it. Then it would fade until the interval is over. While I guess I'll lose some specificity, it seems like I could be really efficient this way, and it would make me tough like Jonathan, he says. This is Lee McCormick, by the way, from Lee Likes Bikes, writing this in, I think. So, hi, Lee, first of all. And we've done 2 podcast episodes with Lee and a full video on our YouTube channel. So you can go to youtube.com/TrainerRoad. He is, for me personally, the best mountain bike instructor I've worked with. He's incredible. So he knows what he's doing on this stuff. And it's cool that he's asking us on the training side.
Yep. He made me a lot better, which is like pretty big challenge.
In a day.
Yeah, and you've worked with him twice now, right, Nate?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we've said this before, but like Nate is like I rode behind Nate and I was actually pushing it pretty hard, like hard. Enough so that I was very uncomfortable being this close to behind somebody. It's like that sort of speed. And Nate was ripping. So
next time I'll try to push it and see if you can keep up.
I'll probably get dropped. I know, right?
That would be, if I dropped you ever in my life, I'm just done. Retired from mountain biking. Yeah, descent or climb.
Doesn't get better than that.
Yeah.
Descent or climb.
Yeah, geez, you're pretty fit this year. So getting into Lee's question though, he says, what kind of crazy am I talking? So his main question really kind of, this is how a lot of people ride their bikes, especially, when I first started out, I was like, what's this Strava thing? Oh my gosh. And like insert meme picture of my head exploding, right? Like I was like, this is amazing. So I just kept riding as hard as I could to try to chase a segment, and I would just burn out. And then I would do it again and again. And it like gave me a necessary spike in the beginning to start to become somewhat not slow, but it wasn't any sort of long-term strategy where I could like actually progress to a certain point. But Chad, a lot of people do this, and in our minds, it kind of makes sense. It's like, well, we're pushing ourselves all the way to our max, and then we do it again. Why doesn't it work?
You actually summed it up really well right there, saying it's not a long-term strategy. So actually, before I get to my reply to this, I do want to touch on 2 things that Lee said. And if it is Lee, hey Lee, super cool that you're sending us a question. Well, I guess I'll lose some specificity. Quite the contrary, what you're describing right here is about as specific as it gets. You've determined exactly what your event requires, and you're addressing exactly those demands. So, but that does make sense in certain contexts. We'll get to that. And then you said, it seems like I could be really efficient this way. Time efficient, yes. In terms of training the necessary energy systems, not so much. And I'm going to talk about that right now. Excuse me. So developing multiple energy systems in a single phase of training is already a pretty big ask. And then trying to do all of that in the same workout is a really big ask. So if you look at traditional periodization, which is basically the way we approach it at TrainerRoad, we use the base, build, and specialty phases of training. And they address this by whittling down the focus gradually. So for instance, you start in the base phase, and it's the most general type of training that's going to benefit pretty much every type of rider. Move on to the build phase, and things get increasingly more specific depending on the demands of the particular events that you're pursuing, that you're working toward. And then we get into that specialty phase. That's when it gets the most specific. And it's in this specialty phase that you'll see workouts just like you're describing, Lee. This actually sounds a lot like, and not exactly the same, but a lot like a race winner, where you go out with a hard surge, you maintain, and then you finish with a bit of a hard surge, repeat ad nauseum. And then in conjunction, maybe with, depending on the plan, the specialty plan you're in the midst of, there are combination workouts that will actually take those race winners and lump them together with something like microbursts. And the idea there was that you're trying numerous times to get away, and then you get away and you're in a small group, and the small group starts attacking itself. That sort of thing. Just scenarios that might apply to each of these specialties. But it does get that specific at some point. And then it's worth mentioning too that if there isn't a workout that is as specific as you'd like it to be, our workout creator is a great way to get hyper specific with what you want to do. Again, I would recommend saving this until the specialty phase, but that workout creator is a very handy tool when it comes to this sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So the issue really is across phases and within the same workout is something I refer to as stimulus dilution. So the more adapted you become to different types of training, the greater the stimulus that's required for further adaptation. You can't just continue doing the same thing and expect your body to keep responding positively. You have to keep upping the demand. So again, if we go back to base, it's pretty general because we're effectively starting with a clean slate. I mean, you probably are bringing some fitness into it, but we're taking this, this moldable ball of clay and starting to form it. Then you move into the build, and it shifts more of the emphasis onto those energy systems that are going to be relied upon depending on, again, what you're doing, whether you're a time trialist or a criterium, and even a criterium rider, and even within that, are you more the sprinter than the breakaway artist, etc. So it gets just a little more specific. And then specialty, by the time you get there, it's assumed that the necessary capabilities are all in place. They might be a bit unrefined, but that's what specialty's for. It's to refine them, to touch them up, and then to start to blend them in ways that are practical and usable in whatever event it is. So in Lee's case, so the question you're saying, if this is all you did, you'd really have to do more and more and more of it. So one week, maybe you have 2 or 3 of these workouts with 5 repeats. Then the next week, it'd have to be 2 or 3 with 6 repeats, or 6, 5, 6. And then the next week, 7, 7, 7. The point is, you can't keep escalating that and keep chasing the adaptation, because at some point you're going to come up against the ceiling.
Yeah, and especially when we're talking about something that cascades from an all-out instant effort as hard as you possibly can, all the way down to 5 minutes.
Yep.
That's, you're using a pretty broad range of energy system stress that you're enacting right there. So like you said, bumping up against those limits, since you aren't addressing any one of those in particular, those limits will get hit pretty quick, and they'll stand hard in your way.
And that in and of itself is a perfect illustration of what I mean by stimulus dilution, is you're going to hit it super hard coming out of the gates. And then what are you going to have to draw upon as you're trying to touch up or, hit those other energy systems? It's going to be a diluted impact, or a diluted stimulus, and therefore a diluted adaptation.
Yeah, I mean, if you even look at something, I know a 3-minute interval may not seem particularly long, especially to steady state athletes that are listening to this, but even a 3-minute interval, if you go out as hard as you can at the start of a 3-minute interval, and then you just hang on for the rest of it, I guarantee you're going to have a higher average power if you try to hit a target that's stable, something like 120% all the way across. It's going to be tougher for you to actually hit that 120% average if you just went for 3 minutes, because once again, we're talking about a cascading draw across those energy systems. You're not just, focusing specifically on one. And this is like, I think mountain bikers in particular are really guilty of this sort of thing a lot of the time, because of the fact that terrain already makes you work so hard, many cases, right? It's so steep. So then as a result, you end up, or even like, hilly terrain. I don't know, you live in like Vermont and spots like that, where it's just extremely like constant steep rollers, right? Whatever terrain you're on. You can kind of fall into this trap where all of your rides actually emulate this to a certain degree. And while you don't have any specific objectives with your training, it ends up wearing you down, because this sort of stuff enacts a lot of stress, but it's just not specific stress. So then it makes it really tough when you actually have to be specific outside of those rides. It can be hard. So
yeah, I do want to say this is a very usable interval format, but it would have to be timed really appropriately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nate, is there anything, Nate or Amber, anything that and we're probably going to do this, by the way, since we're not in the same room, we can't quite feel the vibes from each other. So anything else that you two would want to add on this?
I've got good vibes. Nope.
I was going to say, I'm feeling good vibes. I don't know about you.
Good.
I need to go to the bathroom. That's about it.
Okay. Sounds good. If one of us gets up and leaves, it might be that. It might be trying to help a small child or something. Who knows? So Kieran's question on our doc here, guys. Let's go into that one. It says, after 4 years of using TrainerRoad and listening to the podcast, I finally thought of a question no one has asked before. That's a pretty big one. I recently took 9 days off the bike for a family holiday, having managed to complete Lamarck before my break, which is a hard steady state effort we're talking about there. I really struggled to finish carry on, which that workout is actually one where it's over unders. So you're sitting right at or around threshold with pretty short little spikes. And I'm sure producer Tucker will be able to pull up the screen so that we can see it. And hopefully I'm right when I say that, just for memory there. But, says, I usually find this workout very manageable, but on my return, it was tougher. So having read Faster, the book by Michael Hutchinson, which I would recommend, by the way, Chad, you've read that one too, I assume.
Yeah, I love most of what he's written.
Yeah. Amber?
I haven't read Faster, but I read Endurance, and I really, really like him too. He does great stuff.
Yeah.
Endure. That's one. Yeah.
Fantastic author. Great follow on Twitter as well, by the way. So Karen says, having read Faster by Michael Hutchinson, I started wondering how much this apparent decrease in fitness is actually down to a drop in my blood plasma. After only a few short workouts, I seem to be back where I was. So my questions are, number one, how quickly does blood plasma volume decrease after training stops? Do you want to take these one at a time, Chad, or do you want to run through all of them?
No, go ahead and run through.
Cool. Number two, how long does it take to increase this blood plasma from off the couch to an in quotes, athlete level? Is this why Tanita scales have an athlete setting? Is the final question that's asked there. So thanks to the brilliant podcast and app combination, I'm 45 years old and have never been faster, from Kieran. So cool. Thanks, Kieran, for training with us.
That's awesome.
Yeah, good question, Kieran. It's really, really thoughtful. Let me address just that last one because that's the easiest of these to get. I just went to Tanita's site and because I wanted to know how they distinguish between regular body type and athletic body types. And I'm just going to quote from the site: athletic body types are physiologically different than standard adult body types due to muscle mass and hydration level differences. And what struck me as a little interesting is they go on to say athletes tend to have greater muscle mass, that much we can all agree on, and tend to be more dehydrated. So they're crediting athletes with being more dehydrated. I kind of see it differently, and I think athletes are probably better at hydrating and maintaining higher hydration levels. But that's how they look at it. These differences would skew the body fat reading high when taken with the standard adult mode.
Okay.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I've always wondered the same thing. Turns out it's on their website and all I had to do was read. So
Who knew?
Who knew, huh? So where do you want to start with the rest of this one,
Okay.
Chad?
So first off, let's kind of touch back on something we've covered in different ways at different times. And that is that training adaptation and the capabilities that they confer fade at different rates. And we've talked about training residuals many times. So just as a quick review, there are some that decay comparatively slowly. It's like on the order of 30 or so days. And that's your aerobic capacity, your aerobic endurance, call it what you will. And that's because the adaptations that take place, so what's happening within the muscle itself, and when we're talking about increase in capillary bed, so more blood vessels, the aerobic enzymes that help us metabolize the energy sources, in this case, in the presence of oxygen, mitochondrial content, they don't just spring up and then go away rapidly. Similarly, maximum strength, and I think that's probably because there's a large neuromuscular component. So once the wiring is in place, it doesn't just evaporate overnight if you don't touch it up. A little more quickly in terms of decay would be your anaerobic power, so your shorter power, and then your strength endurance, which would be your sweet spot-ish power or your threshold work. And then most quickly, and we're talking over a handful of days, is something along the lines of sprint power, and unfortunately, blood plasma volume, or fortunately, actually, because it goes both ways. So it really, if you just look at it from the perspective that if it develops quickly, it tends to dissipate quickly. If it takes a long time. Go ahead.
I was just going to comment on that. I was like, oh, this is sort of the reverse order of what we see coming, what we see as building through a season, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah,
exactly.
Good point.
Exactly. Okay. So like I said, blood plasma happens to be one of those things, but again, not necessarily a bad thing, because if it goes away quickly, it means it kind of ramps up quickly or has the potential to ramp up quickly. So to be clear, a lot of people may not know what we're talking about when we say blood plasma. It's just the liquid component of blood. So blood is either the watery stuff or it's the formed bodies, which are your red blood cells, your white blood cells, and your platelets. So basically all these things float around in this liquid component, which is largely water. It's a number of other things, but it's largely water. And the more plasma we have, the greater our blood volume. So the greater the amount of blood in our body, which means the greater our stroke volume. So every time our heart beats, the more volume it pushes out. And this means less cardiac effort and a lower heart rate for similar work levels. If you're pushing more blood to the muscle with bigger, effectively bigger heartbeats, bigger volumes, then it doesn't have to beat as many times as it would with lower blood volume. And this also means there's a higher aerobic or oxygen uptake at the same effort level, which is basically what I just described. If it's pushing more oxygen to the muscle with less heartbeats, then you're getting the possibility of greater aerobic power. There's more oxygen there, so we can do more aerobic work, which means reduced lactate accumulation. Because why does lactate accumulate? But when we're working anaerobically, if we can do more work aerobically, then that anaerobic byproduct isn't going to build up to the same extent. There's also a benefit of increased blood flow to our skeletal muscle, and this can reduce rate of glycogen depletion. And a couple of the studies that I looked at legs muscles in particular talked about, pretty drastic reductions in the rate of glycogen depletion along the lines of 40 to 50%.
Holy cow.
So these are a big deal. So you leave those glycogen stores alone a lot longer if you're pushing, extra fluid, which is carrying extra oxygen, extra nutrients to the blood or to the working muscle. And then, of course, also you're going to lower your core temperature, and you're going to have a higher sweat rate because there's greater blood flow to the skin. So that's kind of a win-win on top of all the other benefits.
These are all reasons why sauna training is
exactly.
or sauna, some sort of sauna protocol is something that can help make you faster.
Exactly. It can help you it just extends your training capabilities and your performance capabilities.
Yeah, Chad, I just want to quickly follow up on the increased blood flow effect that spares glycogen. Does that apply to hydration status as well, or is that too small of a blood plasma volume change to have a significant effect?
It did vacillate, or one of these studies did vacillate back and forth between plasma volume and total body water. So I kind of jumped tracks at some point, but I'll dig those up and we can tie them to this.
That's just really interesting.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot more. It's just a heck of a lot more than I would have expected.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. So effectively what happened for you, Kieran, I think is that, I know you stopped training, and when you stop training, you've reduced the training stimulus, and in turn you got a decrease in your plasma volume, which means your heart rate's going to bump up to achieve the same level of, blood distribution to the working muscle. This also impairs your thermoregulation. All these things make it more stressful. And these are all things that can happen over the course of a simple recovery week, which is why we do recovery weeks that aren't free of work. We don't just sit and rest and catch up. Rather, we keep on working because we don't want these adaptations to go away. And if you're noticing some of the adaptations do go away, maybe your recovery week is a little too easy. Maybe there are ways that you can limit that. But honestly, it probably doesn't matter, because a couple days back in the saddle and you're going to be right back on track, and you're only going to lose so much. So again, the changes in plasma volume, both directions depend on the circumstances. So for instance, and I think we mentioned this one back when we talked or heat acclimation, sauna heat acclimation, but Sauka's 2015 study in Medicine and Science and Sports, they subjected their subjects to heat exposure for 3 to 4 days and noticed a pretty hefty expansion in their plasma volume. It was the greatest on the 5th day. In this study, and in studies in general, they're looking at something along the lines of 4 to 15%, but that range is a pretty big one and can vary as far as from 3% all the way up to 27%. So these can be big changes in a really vital component in terms of a number of things that I just talked about. And then a good heat acclimation protocol along the lines of 7 to 10 days can have similar benefits even in high-level athletes. So you don't have to be off the couch to see a lot of these same benefits conveyed. And then it's absolutely worth mentioning that endurance training on its own does this, especially in hot conditions. And you can just turn off the fan and increase this response, these heat shock proteins that we've talked about in the past. All these responses that come because of heat stress can be achieved simply by ramping up your core temperature. And just about any workout does that. More so if you turn off that fan, more so if you do it on a hot day outdoors, etc. And it works especially well when it comes to that muscle endurance work. And this is pointed out by Dr. Andrew Coggan. With tempo work, pretty big bump up in plasma volume. Threshold work, even bigger. And VO2 max work, even bigger. But Andrew Coggan also pointed out in one of his studies that the half-life of our plasma volume is about 1 week. So you take a week off and you saw 20% increase, you're going to have about a 10% increase at the end of that week of effectively detraining. So in Kieran's case, he probably lost about roughly half of any of his recent plasma volume gains. But silver lining is you're going to get that back. Get back on the bike, get training again. The first couple of workouts might not be quite as up to snuff as you'd like them to be, but they'll get back on track quickly.
Chad, so is this, sorry, Jonathan, is this why, so when I take like a week off for travel and I come back, that first workout, my heart rate is pegged. Like it's totally pegged, and the RP isn't that much higher, but it's just like pumping.
I'd be willing to bet this is maybe entirely the reason. If not, then most of the reason.
Wow.
This is also like this is, people always talk about summer form, like coming into form in the summer and everything else. And I wonder how much of this just, naturally happens over the course of the fact that the warmer months come along. You spend more time training in that environment. One thing I do want to add on this, because whenever we're sharing any sort of topics like this, like I feel like all of us listening to this are like, where's the actionable takeaway? I'm going to apply it. And you have to balance this though, right, Chad? Because if you come into this and you just think, okay, I'm going to do all of my workouts and just do it in the heat because I'm going to get all of this benefit. Number one, there is a ceiling that you'll hit with that in terms of these sort of returns. It's not like you can endlessly increase blood plasma volume. Yep. Then number two, this has a detrimental effect, a profound one on your ability to be able to produce work. More heat is tough.
Exactly right. And therefore the stimulus is diluted again. But this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about when people think, well, if this helps my training, then I'm just going to heap this on top of the training that I'm already doing. And they don't, and it can work. It can work. I'm not trying to criticize you specifically or people who take this approach, but you do have to recognize that it is another form of stress. It's going to take a toll. So it has to come at some expense somewhere else. You can't just keep piling on.
When he said you, he meant me. Because when I see something, I just do more and more.
I totally thought Nate. We often say that Nate is a maximalist, not a moderationalist, not a minimalist, a maximalist, right?
And sometimes that works.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I don't have any science to back this up, but a little bit. This is going to be good. This is how I've noticed, this is how I've applied it. And I think right now, this could be really poignant, I think is the right word. So not everyone has a sauna at home, right? If you look at my Instagram, by the way, I'm 4,000 followers away from being able to give you guys all links. And Pearson99. But I did a TR office tour, and it's in my story highlights, so you can look at it. But in there, we have a sauna. But right now, since the office is closed, it is my personal sauna. But most people do not have saunas access right now. And this is what I realized this is what I did, and I got a big bump in FTP while I was doing this. And I think it could apply to a lot of people right now, is in the morning, Brandon does this too, double days. Like if you have, maybe you had a commute before and now you don't, you do a 30 or 60 minute aerobic ride and you don't use your fan, do it right in the morning, do it fasted, drink your black coffee, right, with some water. And again, this is going to be more stress. So you have to do it, you have to be aware and you don't want it to take away from your intensity. Is that right, Chad? Like if you can't hit your intense workouts, you want to take this out first.
Yep, exactly right.
Yeah, so you do your 30 or 60 minute petit or petit -1 or taku or something in the morning. Just a little bit more stress, fasted, which is cool. And then do the no fan. And I bet you're going to see a pretty good increase. Just 1 with the extra TSS, 2, the fasted, and 3, the no fan. You could probably actually do, yeah. And if it's too much stress, you could do, maybe you do the fan first. Right in the middle, you're like, oh, this is really hard. You turn the fan back on, because I'm talking about 3, more volume, fasted, and no fan at the same time. So that's 3 things at once. But I hope that makes sense to everybody. But that's kind of cool to do. And you could replace that in your commute, right? And you don't have to take a shower. You don't have to do your hair in the morning unless you're on a podcast.
No, this is exactly the approach I took when we were gearing up for Kona this year. So after getting my butt handed to me basically every day at Kona last year, I tried to drum up a little fitness this year, and this was one of the things I did. And a lot of those rides were fanless, and you're a sopping mess. It's disgusting. You definitely go directly to the shower right after. But it paid pretty big dividends because my training volume wasn't a heck of a lot higher, but I did add these additional, I think all of them were 1-hour rides to 3 or 4 days a week.
Yeah, you manage so Chad, I perceive you as a person that struggles with heat more than the average person, and that may be incorrect. But I feel like you this year at Kona, you did really well in the heat. It wasn't like a barrier.
Yeah, heat usually destroys me, but this year was the exception. It was pretty encouraging.
Let's move into Tim's question. It says, I love everything about TrainerRoad and I'm a subscriber for life. Thank you, Tim. We appreciate that. He says, I recently bought my first power meter, and I'm excited to start doing TrainerRoad workouts outside as well on my head unit, which is super cool. We actually have a blog post about how to set up your Garmin, by the way, that we recently put up. With a custom screen for the Edge 1030, 830, and 530. They have new data fields you can use that are really cool and make your workouts easier.
To interrupt you there, you can make it look just like TrainerRoad. And if you look at our Strava or our Instagrams, it's kind of snowing here, but it's so so cool.
Oh, it's
The
awesome.
Garmin to do it. Like you can seriously do a trainer workout outside and do it well as long as you have the roads, which I think we're going to talk about.
Yeah, and also like it's worth saying too in this time of social distancing and lockdown and everything else, depending on this the situation where you currently are, this could be an option, and there is a huge amount of benefit to getting outside if you're just stuck inside at all times and don't have your usual outside time that you're getting. So you can still nail your workouts and you can do them outside. So we have an article coming up on how to do something similar for your Wahoo head unit too, by the way, and because you can customize those screens as well.
That being said, we understand that in some places, like right now, Spain and France, or Spain and Italy, it is illegal to ride outside. And there is the social concept of or constructive, if your ERs are overrun in your area or hospitals, you don't want to ride outside, crash, and then have to take one of those beds. Or it could be just dangerous to you. So again, this is changing quickly. I just want to say we're aware of that, and you should be aware of it too, and understand in your area what the situation is before you go right outside.
For sure. Okay, so Tim says, however, I am learning quickly that holding a constant power output outdoors is a lot harder than I was expecting, especially on rolling roads. All of us are nodding, by the way. If you're just listening to this, we're all nodding. He says, it doesn't help that I live in central Pennsylvania where there's no such thing as a flat road. So I'm wondering if you guys have any tips or advice on how to best for how best to maintain steady watts on rolling terrain. I can't seem to find a balance between constantly changing my cadence versus constantly changing gears when I'm on rolling terrain. I've tried anticipating quick changes in grade by dropping gears and upping cadence, but this leads to a very spiky power curve, even using 3 or 5 second power smoothing. I assume this is something that will get better with practice, but if there are tips you have to help me speed up that process, I'd very much appreciate it, from Tim. So first of all, Tim, you're absolutely right. And especially since you just got a power meter, I think all of us probably here, when you first got a power meter, I thought it was broken. And I had 5 second power smoothing on. It didn't matter. I thought it was broken because it was bouncing everywhere. It's normal, right?
It's a skill, and it's the first thing people say. They're like, "This is impossible to look at because it's so crazy." And I think the best rider, especially if you're you're soloing, and you're in a race or something, to be able to be steady and not up and down. Like do a workout that's like just 90% of threshold, and then do that same workout and throw in like spikes. You will not finish it, or it'll be a lot harder if you have those spikes and you're spiking above threshold all the time. This is such a great skill to practice. I think Chad's and Amber are going to go into it, but don't give up. Figure out how to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Chad, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. I only have a couple of quick points, and one of them was that your power profile, when you look at the file, or even when you look at your power meter as it rolls, doesn't matter how much is smooth, it's going to be all over the place. So don't sweat that. Gearing is one way you can address it. If this is at home, so I live in a pretty hilly neighborhood too. I'm not sure there's gearing that would allow me to keep steady power up and down the hills because they're pretty severe pitches. If they're gentler, the gearing may be a way to go about it, in which case you're already on the right track. You're shifting a bunch, you're anticipating. You can vary the terrain. So if you have access to trails and maybe they're a little less severe than the roadways, do make that a consideration. And then, of course, train indoors. That's pretty easy.
Sure. Yeah. One thing before you jump in on this, Amber, the first time I really started to figure this out was when I was riding with a professional Ironman triathlete, Åsa Lundström. And she was like, I'm just holding a power target. And like for this interval, I'm going to ride at 280, right? Let's just assume. And when we go up hills, we weighed about the same. But when we go up hills, I was like, geez, this feels so easy, because I wasn't used to training with power at the time. And then when we would go down hills, I was like, you're a psycho. You're going so hard and so fast. But once you get a power meter, you realize that, right? If you have to hold a steady power target, once you're going up a pitch, it's a lot easier to overshoot that mark. When you're going downhill, it's a lot harder to hold that power up at first. Over time, it'll get to the point where that just becomes second nature, and it isn't as hard or difficult. It's just different, and you'll be able to maintain it. But it just, I guess, adding to this point that it will come with time. When I do my outside workouts, I can have over rolling terrain even. I can have an interval that's 20 minutes long, and for that 20 minutes long, I'll have 1 watt difference between my normalized and average power, right? So it's like It's very evenly paced in the end. I think one of the worst things you can do though is look at your power. And if you're trying to hold 200 watts and when it says 197, you try to press harder on your pedals, because then if you do that, then it's going to read 210. And then after that, you're going to ease up and it's going to read 180. And then you're just going to constantly be doing that. Instead, it's honing in on what it feels like when you're close to your target power and really holding that feeling. That feeling will evolve over time. So you periodically check back in. And this is another safety note too. It's very important on the safety side not to just be staring at your head unit and obsessing at staying really close to your power. Just figure out what the feeling is like close to that, and then occasionally check in to kind of guide that feeling back into place. Amber, what would you have on this one?
Yeah, I totally agree with everything these guys are saying. It is a learning curve. And for the record, I didn't start working with a power meter until like my third year racing professionally. And even after racing for 3 years professionally, I was on a learning curve with the power meter because it's a completely different beast. And I think before you're actually getting the feedback of a power meter, if you don't have a cycling computer, the natural kind of metric that you orient to is steady speed. And that's a really, really different sensation. Jonathan, to your point, if you're going for steady speed, it's going to feel harder going up the hills and a lot easier going down the hills. But then when you're going for steady power output, you feel like you're just crawling up the hill, and then you feel like you're a maniac on the downhill. It's funny. It's just, and it's all relative. So yeah, it's a total learning curve, and I feel your pain. I live in Connecticut, and the profiles around here are just a sawtooth, and so finding a flat route it's not going to happen. It's just a relatively flat route is the best thing that you can hope for. And I've raced around Pennsylvania, so I know what you mean. I will say that around here, sort of the glacial movements were north-south. So roads that run north-south tend to be a little bit less hilly than roads that run east-west. And I think it might be a similar situation in Pennsylvania. So that might be something to think about. So if you need to do a steady state power interval, maybe look for one of those roads that's running north-south, and it'll just make it a little bit easier on you. A few things that have worked for me on this, even after years of training with a power meter and getting better and having been on that learning curve, I still cannot hold super, super steady power over rolling terrain. It's hard. So what I do is I just set kind of a range of power. So to Jonathan's point, if I'm targeting 200 watts and I drop down to 198, I'm not going to panic about that because that's about right. And usually what I'll do is I'll sort of give myself a range of like, okay, I don't want to go any higher than this number, but I also don't want to go any lower than this number. And I'll just try to keep my power somewhere above a floor that I set for myself on that interval. And then, as the road kicks up a little bit, I don't want to go too hard because I know that that's going to sap my legs and I might not be able to hold the power for the rest of the interval. So shooting for a range with more of a focus on the floor of that range, I think is really helpful. And Jonathan brought this up too. It's the feeling, it's the sensation of the pressure on the pedals. And that's the thing that you're really looking to train. So you can use this as like a mental focus training exercise to start with shorter, intervals to try to train this. Like go for a minute, use the first 30 seconds to calibrate the pressure that you're supposed to feel on the pedal, and then see if you can hold that power just by thinking about the sensation and not by chasing the number on your computer, and see if you can do that. It's a good way to train your mental focus too, because when you're in the middle of a race, you're not necessarily going to have the opportunity to be looking at your power meter, and you're going to want to be able to race on feel in those situations where you need it. So it's just a good skill to learn and to train, and it's a good challenge. But yeah, it's a really good way to train your focus as well.
Crazy thing, we have a Franktown time trial course here. The three of us have done it, and the three, Jonathan, Chad, and I, and so is Justin Rossi. And I've looked at all of our files, and Jonathan and I are the worst at pacing this because it's kind of like has some rollers in it. Chad's pretty good. And then Justin Rossi is scaringly even. And if you guys remember, he's the one on the Chase Nationals, got second at Nationals 2 years in a row.
He was on last week.
Yep. He's amazing time trialist. And his power is like just right at threshold, even the whole way. You wouldn't even tell that there were hills. And honestly, Jonathan, you're kind of the worst at this out of us three. But
in this case, at that race,
on that course, yeah.
Yes.
You'd go really far hard out. But then Chad is like really, really good at it too. And I believe he's got a pretty good time on that too. especially relative to the power output that he was doing compared to us. Like he could put out more average power, which is crazy. The second thing is, I don't have any specific numbers on this yet. And I want to be very, very careful and diligent before we release it. But I can say this part with confidence. If you're over 60 and you are riding like next to threshold, all those spikes above threshold are going to hurt you more than someone at 30. So if you're an older rider and you're doing time trials or you're in a breakaway or something like that, be very, very careful of how much you spike over threshold if you want maximum average power output, which is probably going to mean maximum speed inside of that. So if you're doing a time trial and there's a little hills, I would not be pushing it above if you're over 60 compared to someone who's 30. It's all relative. I wouldn't be doing it anyways, but I would be just take extra diligence based on the data that we have for riders over 60.
The last thing that I would add to this too, and to kind of, I guess, give you some hope in this case, Tim, and I guess really what you can look forward to, have all of us here ever been in a situation where you've been trying to, hold a steady power and you shift a couple gears or you shift one gear and your legs automatically adjust for the resistance and your power doesn't spike? And like whenever that happens, I'm like, my legs are like an erg trainer. This is awesome. But it's what happens when you get used to, especially since in this case, Tim, you're training with TrainerRoad. You've been following structured workouts. You're going to be doing that. You'll have a big leg up on holding steady power and knowing what that's like. And having an erg trainer, you still get the same thing. It's not like if you have an erg, it gets rid of it. You understand that same relationship of basically velocity and force that goes on with your legs when you're trying to create power. So you'll get to the point, Chad, where you'll be much more steady than you think, which is really cool. And then go ahead.
Sorry,
not Chad.
That's we all understand. I should probably elaborate. I said train indoors. What I meant to say is that you can work on this indoors just as you can outdoors. I even have a couple of workouts where I coax people from maybe 8-minute interval to 8-minute interval to this one. Try to limit your range to 15 watts plus or minus. Next one, 10 watts plus or minus. Next one, 5 watts plus or minus. And you try to just narrow that range gradually over time. It's probably not going to happen over the course of a workout, but it's fun to try.
That's if you're not in erg mode. You can do that in the device setting. And do the resistance. And I do that a lot too. I think it's beneficial, especially in really hard workouts, to have that feeling like this is what 125% feels like, to Jonathan's point.
You can even do it in erg mode, to a lesser extent. I've been in erg mode and really tried to limit how much it wavers.
Yeah. You can always be smoother, right? The last thing too that kind of helps with this with outside workouts is you'll have your workout screen that you've customized per that blog post that we have up on TrainerRoad on how to customize your Garmin. And the same thing with a Wahoo. But on Garmin's screens, all you have to do is just swipe back over to see the Garmin screen. And it actually gives you a range through which, the power target is in the middle of that range, but it gives you a range. And it's actually like a visual from this anchor point to this anchor point. And so if at first you're noticing that it's distracting and a little bit frustrating, flip over to that screen, look at that for a while. You'll see that it's really not that big of a deal. From second to second, things are changing, but that's it. And then actually, I lied. One more point on this. I think a lot of people, and this is a question that that we've all had many times, you'll look at normalized power, average power for your interval instead, and you'll just try to do that. But a tricky thing about that is a lot of the time, something happens with your interval. You start hard, which is really common, or you had to slow down and make a turn, or slow down for some reason and drop your wattage down. For the rest of that interval, your average power will read low, but your goal should not be to ride over your power target to drag that average back up. Your goal should just be every second, just constantly try to stay close to that power. And if you have a situation where for some reason your power spikes above or below, don't worry about that. Don't try to drag your average back up. Just still try to stay close to that, because when you work at a specific intensity, specific things happen in your body, and that's what we're going after. We're not going after a total accumulation by the end of the interval in terms of like an average power necessarily. So would you guys agree or disagree with that?
Totally agree with that. And just add a quote that stuck in my mind in my career. So I was working with a coach earlier on, and I was, new athlete, wanted to do everything right. And so I was one of those that would ride around the block to get the last 5 minutes to make sure I hit my volume target for the day. And my coach, I remember, laughed at me one day and just said, nah, Your physiology is just not that specific.
That's a good way to think of it. Your body doesn't know, right?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like you do the best you can, but to your point, Jonathan, like as long as you're within the range, of the system that you're trying to target, you're going to get the stress and the specific adaptations that you want. So, that's just don't worry about making it perfect. Your physiology is just not that specific.
Andrew's question says, hello, TrainerRoad. Says, I have started to follow consistent structured training this year and want to start racing. There are a few local races I plan on participating in. And with the new USA cycling rule changes, I could start in Cat 5, which is now called novice, or I could start in Cat 4. A little Googling suggests that an FTP of about 3.7 watts per kilogram is what I have, and that might make me competitive in Cat 3 racing, except that I have zero racing experience. So should I ride in novice and get the experience, which used to be Cat 5, or should I start in Cat 4? Thank you for considering my question. We haven't actually talked about this specific thing yet, since now
good question.
It's optional, right? Like you don't have to start in Cat 5 or novice.
Yeah. Can I take this one? Being someone who's went through this, and you guys can tell me if I'm right or wrong. 100% ride Cat 5. That is what it is for riders that have not experienced a race situation. And if you are a new rider, here's what I'd want you to do is first be able to ride by yourself, do all the normal things, drink water bottle, ride with one hand while you're riding. 2, ride in a group safely, like do group dynamics, pace turns, all that sort of stuff. And then 3, a race. And just because you ride in a group does not mean you're going to be good in a race situation in a group, because it is much, much different. And like tolerances are tighter, people are closer to you. It can kind of freak you out. Accelerations are a lot different, filling in the gaps. So totally start in Cat 5. If you are blowing apart every race and you feel totally comfortable in it, then go to Cat 4 where you're not getting experience. But I would definitely get some rides. And that's what this new category is for, is people who do not have race experience. And then at 3.7 watts per kg, you might think like you're going to be competitive in Cat 3, but it's so different. So much of it is skill based, and especially based on your weight and the course. 3.7 might not be enough. Or if you're 240 pounds, 3.7 probably is pretty good, and you're going to like destroy some people. But if you're 120 pounds, 3.7 might not make you competitive in a flat crit, but maybe in a hilly crit, it does. So really get that race experience. And 2, plug for us. This is all free, but I would go on YouTube and watch our entire race analysis series that I think we've all went through, and there's a playlist there, and that's where we walk you through what to do in a race. That will get you such better racecraft and skill that you'll be way ahead of those Cat 5s. You'll be able to like kind of apply those race where apply those skills that you learn without the demands of the race being extremely hard. Because when you're not in over your head, I think you can learn a lot and practice like different kind of techniques. Like, okay, I'm going to practice moving from back to front in this race when it slows down every time. And you don't really need to have a race outcome goal because your results don't matter. I'm going to be practice like staying towards the front for this race, or maybe for this half of the race. I'm going to practice letting other people fill in the gaps for this time. I'm going to practice on this time looking ahead in the field and seeing when they start to coast, I'm going to just do a couple extra pedal strokes, right? And so that or when they start to accelerate, I'm going to accelerate a little bit earlier, even though the people in front of me aren't accelerating. I'm going to practice like going through the turns next to somebody, getting my handlebars in front of somebody else. All of these things that you'll see in our race analysis videos, this is the time to do it because you don't worry about the race, the results. Then after that, go into Cat 4, then try to win, right? Try to apply these with, and figure out how you can win too, because you could do that in Cat 5 also. I don't think you really know how you're going to win. You might think now, but until you try different things in the race, maybe it's a breakaway, maybe it's a 200-meter sprint, maybe it's a 500-meter sprint, right? Maybe it's a 1-minute solo breakaway. Maybe it's a counterattack. You don't know what kind of racer you are really until you start trying different things.
Yeah, and one thing one other tactic that's really good to practice, especially in Cat 5, when you start out, is for the last 5 laps, I'm going to hold a consistent position within the field. Like I'm going to try to stay 5th wheel, right? Like that's like your goal. And those sort of exercises, it's really just drills and you're just training yourself. I had somebody reach out on Instagram the other day, and they sent me a message and they let me know that they went from 5 to 2 in a year, just like you did, Nate. and they went from 5 to 2, and they said that the training was really productive, that, they follow our training plans and everything else, but they said the YouTube stuff was just huge for them. And they ended up getting a ton of points because they basically said that they just marked down all the experience. And then because of that, it honestly, like, if you execute in a disciplined manner on those sort of rules with racing, which watch all the videos and you'll pick them all up, it's almost like you're cheating. It's crazy because you can beat people that are so much like faster than you or have more power, everything else.
I beat 5 watt per kilo riders when I'm at like 3.9. Now that's at sea level. So below I'm probably more like 4.1 or 4.2 and I'm heavier. But yeah, totally beat people who are way more fit than me all the time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, your FTP, it's one of many tools in your toolbox, right?
Yeah.
And it can be a very powerful tool, but when it comes to racing, it's not the only one. And that's what getting race experience does for you, is it expands the tools in your toolbox, which are all really, really important for being successful and performing well on a race day.
How did you figure it out, Amber? Because you went like
she walked through the field. She was like, "This is easy."
Your trajectory was like boom, like you had this huge engine from swimming, right? But at the same time, like you had to figure it all out. Did you lean on teammates or like what were your resources?
I want to know too, Amber. When did it get hard? Because I think you walked through the field. Like when was it? You're like, wow, I need to start using tactics rather than just destroy everyone.
Yeah.
Well, I got really, really lucky, you guys. So when I started racing, I was racing collegiate racing, and I didn't take it seriously the first season that I raced, but then the second season that I did, I got very serious. I wanted to be good at this, and my teammates were all very experienced. And in particular, I started dating David, who's now my husband, and he was already a Cat 1 racer, and he's a sprinter. So he, in particular, had to be really wily about getting to the finish, right? He wasn't a climber who could just climb away from everybody on a mountaintop finish. He had to be really tactical in every race that he was racing. So literally from the very first race of the season, we would sit down before the race and he would just say 10 to go do this, 15 to go do this. And he taught me a lot of the tactical strategies that I needed to be successful. So, I mean, he literally sat me down and was like, yeah, it's great that you're strong, but here's how you race smart. And I had that kind of guidance from the very first race that I did that season. So I think if it hadn't been for that, it would have been a much less steep trajectory, because I would have been figuring this out on my own. I would have been figuring it out through trial and error. And I still did figure a lot out through trial and error, but I had such a leg up because I had mentors who knew what they were talking about and who were really guiding me through every race.
So marry a Cat 1 sprinter. That's probably the best advice. Two, this is more Amber, not talking about the things she's done. So we were at a product management offsite, and we were going through like some of the races that I was going to do and stuff, and talking about them with Pete. And Amber's like, "Oh yeah, I won that one. Oh, I won that one too. Oh, I won that one. I won that one too." I was like, I'm like, "What about this one?" She's like, "Oh, I didn't do that one." Like,
otherwise she would have won it.
I think she won all of them. Is there?
Yeah,
I've got a few shots over a couple of years to win them, but I think you won like every single race, which is probably annoying for the other women in your category.
It was a lot of fun. I will say, when getting to the professional ranks was more difficult from a physiological perspective. Like, it was physically more taxing, but I think that the nice thing about learning race tactics is they're not complicated. They're not easy to execute, but it's not rocket science. And the same principles apply at a local or a regional race as they do at the professional level. It's just, you may have more and bigger teams that have more matches to burn. So the tactics will be different. Like the actual tactics that play out during a race will be different, but the tactical principles are all exactly the same. When it got really, really hard for me was when I got to Europe. And then that was more about just learning to position within a field that had very, very different dynamics than what I was used to. But that's, tactically speaking, it's all the same. It's all the same principles. So just really start paying attention to that, become a student of the sport, and you really won't regret it.
How were the dynamics different in Europe compared to the US?
It's really more about how the riders move through the field, and it's very different from country to country. And going from a race in the US where we've got maybe 60, 80 women in the field in the professional ranks to a race where we have 200 in the field, and you're not racing on big, spacious, wide American roads. You're racing on really tiny, cobbled roads in Belgium, or really, really narrow roads through villages in the mountains of Italy. Like, there's road furniture that you're not familiar with. And I think we've talked about this on a previous podcast, but the patterns of movement are so different that it really sets your brain back to square one in terms of a learning process, and learning how to develop not a race intuition in terms of tactics, but a race intuition in terms of understanding the flow of riders in the field. So how to surf the movement of the field to maintain your position, to get into position, how to read riders. Yeah, it's a very different, just a different dynamic, a different set of patterns that your brain has to learn all over again.
I think we've seen that with like professionals, like top level US athletes. They go to Europe, and it happens across all different disciplines, mountain biking, cyclocross, where it's a different type of racing, and they have to like spend a lot of time to learn it. And it really like brings them down for a second. And I think we've seen it the other way too, where some Euros come here and Americans can still do well because it's majority American, so the field's different. But also the field in Europe is probably deeper than, I know it is deeper than US.
There's a lot of nuance in execution, right? Like it's and especially when you're talking about race tactics and in general, because it's so dependent on what everything else that's going on and all the variables of the course, that when you can become like a finely tuned instrument, like what Amber's talking about, racing in the pros for a long time, and you can just basically deal with whatever circumstances are coming to you, that all comes with time. But you have to do it like in a heads up manner too, right, Amber?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure that it wasn't like you just got there and then once you figured it out, it was like, cool, got it figured out and done. It's still like a constant process, I would assume.
And it's a very intentional process, I think, is what you're getting at. You don't just go and learn it through osmosis. Like, you have to pay attention during the race. And okay, that person just did that. Why would they have done that? And if early days, it's really hard to do that on the spot during the race. And that's why it's so important to find somebody, a mentor, a fellow racer that you can sit down with after the race and debrief and talk about what happened. Why did this person do that? When this happened, if I had done this, what do you think would have been the outcome? Those types of discussions, it's exactly what we do with the race analysis videos. It's so, so helpful. So the race analysis videos are really good to watch to see how to do that. You'll learn a lot about race tactics and what to do, what not to do. And it'll give you a good template for how to apply this in your own racing too, because the more you pay attention to this and really intentionally and purposefully try to learn from each race experience, the faster you'll pick up on everything and internalize it and develop a really great, strong race intuition.
Go ahead, Chad.
Andrew, if I can offer my 2 cents, I would just strongly caution against putting too much weight into your watts per kg at this point in your career.
Yeah.
I think everything we've talked about so far just demonstrates how that is only one aspect of what you have going for you. And kudos to Nate. That was a super good answer. And it demonstrates or illustrates exactly what I'm talking about. There's so much to be learned in these lower category races that are going to benefit you as you move through the ranks.
Yeah.
I'm experiencing this in P1-2 right now. It's different than Cat 2, Cat 3, Cat 4. Cat 2, 3, 4 are kind of similar, at least in Northern California. But P1-2, it is way different. And you just watched the last video where I got dropped with 500 meters to go or something. I was relying too much on my fitness because I think I did some bad habits of moving up on the outside of the field at the end. And I could just be like, oh, I'm just going to do 600 watts for 20 seconds, get into position. And then and that really hurt me. So when it really did go off, I did not have enough fitness left because the P1-2 guys are they're stronger than me. Where before maybe I had the highest FTP in the race, so I could do that on a flat course and I was pretty aero. But now I need to be a lot smarter in my racing and move up on the inside. It's probably it should have been a little bit harder for me, right? Like to Chad's point, if maybe I'd be a smarter racer right now, I'd just have better. I know I did wrong, but I'd probably have better habits, right? I'm moving up inside the field rather than just, I'm going to go on the outside, go to the front and try to go for a 1 minute bomb or something.
Yeah,
like that.
High levels of fitness allow you to become tactically or strategically lazy.
Yeah.
Sloppy.
Totally. Yeah. That's a really good point. If anything too, watching our race analysis videos will be great because you'll get advice from Pete and Amber on Nate's races and my races and some other people's races too. So when you see that perspective of like multiple racers, because Nate and I race differently, right? So you'll get to see how multiple people make mistakes and how they can improve those mistakes.
A lot of mistakes, right, John?
Many.
Like so many mistakes.
Too many.
So much learning.
Even when Nate and I race together, we make a whole different sort of mistake. It's like once we get together, it's like synergistic suck.
But by the way, the last one we did, we raced together. We were so close to having a great outcome. It was probably 2 seconds of decision.
Yeah.
Where and both of us could have fixed it.
Yes.
And it just hurts. Like it hurts so, doesn't it hurt? Like Jonathan,
so bad.
It hurts more doing it together because I feel I let you down by not communicating.
And I feel I let you down by not being in the right position.
I could have just said, stay right for like a second. And then we would have been in such a better situation. Who knows what the outcome would have been, but such a better situation.
Yeah. And one thing to add to this, but this is a really good point, and I'm sure you exercise this, Amber. I'm sure you did as well, Chad, is this is a principle that we have in place here at work here. You know, we always focus on constant improvement and radical candor and extreme ownership, right? Like those are like 3 big things. And when you talk about racing, constant improvement should be your goal. Radical candor, you have to care enough about the people that if you were racing together and yourself, that you are honest, but from a position of caring with yourself. And then when we talk about ownership, like you have to own your mistakes and recognize, like even if you don't instantly recognize your mistake, and let's say Nate and I in this latest race video we did, let's say Nate did some glaringly obvious mistake, right? And if he did some glaringly obvious mistake, it's really tempting for that person, for the other person to just say, yep, it was all that person's fault. But chances are we can always improve something about how you raced, right? Each person can find some way they can improve. And then like, if you think about it from this perspective, it's like, what's the worst that can happen? You find out areas that you can improve in, and the next time you're better. Like, we should always be looking for ways that we can improve. That'll really help your process. Sorry, Nick, but that'll really help your process in moving up and making sure that you take advantage of all the racing opportunities you have instead of just letting them blow by.
That extreme ownership thing, Jocko Wilkes has it. And if you Googled extreme ownership, you'll see a video. He actually did it in Reno, which was pretty cool. That's just a coincidence. And he has a book about it. But I want to give an example. It's always your fault. And I want to say this. I do a culture meeting with all new employees. And I just take a minute. I'm going to go through what I say to people. Let's say we release a bug. And at a place that doesn't have an extreme ownership, the CEO goes, come on, guys. Like, why don't you do this? Why aren't you on top of this? I told you to have less bugs. Where an extreme ownership CEO would say, this is my fault. I did not put in the systems and processes for this bug not to get released. I obviously need to do a better job communicating how important this is and put in the system so that this doesn't happen. The engineer who doesn't practice extreme ownership goes, well, that wasn't in the test cases. The product manager didn't write it down. How was I supposed to know? It wasn't a list. I did what I was told. The extreme ownership engineer says, well, this is my fault, right? This isn't Nate's fault. This is my fault. I could have asked about this case. I'm a smart engineer. I could go through here. I could think about edge cases more. The same thing with the QA person, the test team. They could have said, oh, there wasn't the test case. Of course I would do it. I'm just following the sheet. Everything checked off. They could also say the same thing. This is my fault. This isn't the engineer's fault. This isn't the CEO's fault. I could have done this. Same with the product manager. And if you get a whole culture of an entire company doing this, you don't get the, you're passing blame. You get in a meeting where you get 5 different solutions right away about how to improve. And then everyone just like builds off of that. It's not ego driven. It's solution driven. And if you can get everyone to do that, and I'm telling you, if you can get your CEO to do this, where the CEO never blames anyone, they just say, this is my fault and here's how we can improve. And everyone instantly goes to how we can improve rather than blaming someone because mistakes are going to happen. I think it's a cool culture. Like, you guys.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's how you go from Cat 5 to 2 in a year. That's how you become, take a normal racing team and become a dominant racing team. That's just how, we should all look at that in terms of cycling, and that's how we should look at our performances. We can always improve them.
Everything you do, relationships too.
Totally.
Like relationships with your significant other. Like if you always take a mindset of, hey, I am not communicating this. It's my fault that I'm not communicating this well enough, right? That's a totally different thing than this person never listens. Right? Yep. You take that mindset, it helps.
Yeah. What was my part in this? How can I be better?
Yeah.
How can I not make the same mistake again? I mean, then that's the other thing. Making mistakes is just normal. It's actually a great thing, because otherwise, how else do we learn? It's just a matter of what are you going to do with the learnings from that mistake, and how are you going to carry that forward so you don't make the same mistake again? You're going to go and make new mistakes. Trust me, none of us are going to run out of the kinds of mistakes that we can make. But the key is, just once you make a mistake, really, really take that lesson to heart, learn from it so that you don't make the same one again.
Yep. Let's do the last question here for this week. Is going to be Christina's question. She says, you might think this is out of your wheelhouse at first, but I think your facility with scientific literature will equip you to answer. Well, it's definitely out of the wheelhouse for Chad, Nate, and I here, but we have Amber. It's because she asks, how does hormonal birth control impact training and performance? I've heard that many elite and pro female athletes avoid it, and I'm wondering if that is because it's detrimental to performance, related to body composition concerns, or has other adverse effects on adaptations on our bodies, or that our bodies make during training. So Amber, you take it away.
Short answer is all of the above. So hormonal birth control does impact training and performance. And so I'll restrict this discussion to hormonal birth control in particular. And this is just the use of synthetic hormones to influence the menstrual cycle, to either make it more regular, for birth control purposes. There's a lot of different health reasons that you might want to go on to a hormonal birth control. But the point is that you use synthetic hormones to manipulate the menstrual cycle. The problem with this discussion really is that there's not a lot of empirical research on this, which is very, very frustrating as a female athlete to want to find this kind of information to understand and feel like you're making a really informed decision about your body and what you're putting into it and how it's going to impact you, especially as an athlete, and understanding how it's going to impact your performance. There's not a lot of good research on this. So with that in mind, I will say that I'll talk a little bit about some mechanistic things. And I think the bottom line with this, honestly, you talk to 10 different women on the same form of hormonal birth control, and you will get 10 vastly different experiences in terms of both the pros and cons. So one of the things that's become really, really clear with these is how they affect your physiology is going to be very, very different than how it's going to affect other people's physiology. There are just so many different feedback mechanisms in these cycles and these hormones, different feedback loops in the body's physiology, that it's really, really hard to make generalizations and say this particular hormonal birth control method is going to have this impact on your performance. It's just not that cut and dry. So with all of that said, I will say that, so there's the birth control pill is a hormonal based birth control that is usually, there's a biphasic, a monophasic, a biphasic, and a triphasic. The monophasic it's the same hormonal dosage for 3 out of 4 weeks, and then you have a week of sugar pills. The biphasic is, I think, a steady estrogen, and then there's an increase in progestin, again, synthetic hormones, and then you have a week of sugar pills. And then there's a triphasic that manipulates both the levels of estrogen and progestin over the course of 3 weeks. But then again, you have a week off with the sugar, or I don't know if that one has the sugar pills or not. All of this is to say that you're using a lot of synthetic hormones, mostly synthetic estrogen and progestin. And the synthetic hormones affect your body in a really, really different way than the natural hormones do. So some of those are really good. So the bottom line with this is it comes down to a cost-benefit analysis on an individual level. Birth control can really help alleviate some symptoms that some women have with irregular cycles, PMS symptoms, especially with endometriosis is a big one. So there are some really, really legitimate reasons that a hormonal birth control would be really, really beneficial to somebody. Reasons other than birth control itself. That said, when you're kind of flooding the system with these synthetic hormones, what can happen is you can get up to, I was looking at some of Stacey Sims' research on this, and you can get up to 6 to 8 times the 6 to 8 times the levels of estrogen and progestin in somebody on a hormonal birth control pill relative to somebody who would just be having a natural cycle. So that's a lot. That's a huge increase in the level of these hormones. And all of these hormones have pros and cons to them. So when you're really flooding the system with them, you often get some of those, an increase in some of the side effects. And the side effects without a lot of the benefits that come with the natural form of the hormones. So it's not awesome. But again, if being on a hormonal birth control alleviates debilitating premenstrual symptoms, that might actually be really, really worth it. So it really comes down to an individual kind of cost-benefit analysis. And the other thing is, I would say, I mean, one of the things I did was I tried a lot of different kinds to figure out what worked for me, because what might give you debilitating side effects on one, trying another one you might find a balance where it's solving some problems for you, but the side effects aren't quite as bad. A lot of the side effects are depression and anxiety related. And so those kinds of mental health related side effects, I think, do, in addition to physiological impacts, can have some real impacts on performance, not only in training, but, obviously in racing too. So it's a lot to consider. One of the things that happens with the week of sugar pills, so you're kind of flooding the body with these synthetic hormones for 3 weeks, and you're taking a break. When you're not on hormonal birth control and you're just having a natural cycle, that's your low hormone phase. That's the lowest hormone phase of the entire cycle. And that's sort of when we see kind of like your highest capacity to do work in terms of training and performance, because you're in the lowest hormone phase. But when you're on a birth control and you're taking that week off with sugar pills, that you're not actually getting low hormone, because now your body is rebounding with estrogen. And so your estrogen levels, your natural estrogen levels during that week are closer to what you would see in the first trimester of pregnancy than they would be during an actual period. So the time that you'd be having your period on a natural cycle versus on synthetic hormones, it's a really, really different physiology that's happening there. So I don't have there's no way to say it's a good thing or a bad thing, but absolutely it has an impact on performance. How it's going to impact your performance is going to be really, really, really individual. And you just have to decide, what's the best configuration for you? Why would you be using it? Is it achieving those things for you? Are the side effects that you're experiencing, are those balancing out as cons with the pros? I'm sorry I don't have a really good kind of black and white answer for this one.
One thing that I have on a question on this, Amber, or actually more, I guess, and once again, these are just anecdotes, but I've spoken with professional level multisport and cyclists, athletes, and it's kind of all over the map. Like some of them say I would never dream of not being on birth control because of the performance effects or the consistency it brings my training. But then I've heard the opposite. I hope that sharing this wouldn't sway anybody's opinion in one direction or the other, but at least to provide some context. Did you find athletes taking birth control to be more common? I mean, since you've raced across the whole gamut of amateur to professional, is it a common thing for athletes that are following a training schedule to use this? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is an impact for sure. But it's not the kind of thing that's going to make or break a career. It's not that big of a deal. It's nothing in that kind of a range. It really, so if you decide that that's the right thing for you, don't feel like you're hindering yourself in a really significant way. I will say, let me think. I would say probably the vast majority of athletes that I was training and racing with did use some form of hormonal birth control, for sure. Most of them were also on kind of this journey of figuring out which one was going to be the right one for them, because most of us were experiencing some kind of a side effect. But yeah, it's very common. So don't feel like, it's like, oh, if you're an athlete, you shouldn't do this. Not by any stretch. It's a very, very personal decision that you have to make. And the key really is just to pay attention to how it's affecting you. And sometimes that's really hard to figure out. Like I finally found one where I felt like, oh, my side effects were all over the map. I mean, I was on one where I was crying myself to sleep every single night for 3 months before it dawned on me that this wasn't normal and that maybe there was something else going on and I didn't really want to live like this. And then the second I changed to a different one, I wasn't crying myself to sleep anymore. But then on the next one, I was getting what they call melasma, which was like dark pigmented patches on your face. That wasn't an awesome side effect. Okay, so we went on to the next one. So the next one that I was on, actually, I didn't feel like I was having any bad symptoms. So I thought, okay, finally I found the one that I would like. And I was on it for, years. And what ended up happening was I was on a vacation and I forgot to bring it. And so I thought, okay, well, I can hang for another, I'll get back on it on my next cycle. And a couple weeks into it, I was like, wow, this is really weird. I feel really happy. I feel unbelievably lighthearted and optimistic about my life. There's no real reason for me to feel like that. And it took a couple weeks of this contrast in just mental and emotional outlook for me to realize that what that particular one had done was like on a very slow, gradual slope had slowly but surely been increasing my anxiety and some depressive symptoms in a way that I wasn't really aware of because it was such a gradual change. And then it wasn't until accidentally having to stop it that I noticed this huge, huge difference just in my emotional outlook. So it can be a really tricky thing too, to pick apart what are symptoms, what are just normal emotional reactions to life. And that's really a frustrating thing because the emotion that you feel as a result of these synthetic hormones is very, very real. And it's kind of this mind trip because you're like, okay, this is a real emotion that I'm experiencing in real life. It's not founded on anything that's real. And that's it's a really bizarre experience, and very frustrating, but something that we grapple with.
Amber, let me ask you a question. How hard is it to extricate the effects of the birth control with the effects of just training stress? So, I mean, can you pin all these issues on the birth control, or can you have to, because you said you went on vacation and all these things started to work, or you started to feel better in general? Could it just be that you got away from your training stress and your body was rebounding? I mean, how do you know specifically that it was the birth control and not the removal of training?
Well, I was training through that vacation, so that was one thing.
She doesn't take vacations.
No vacations.
No training vacations. No, that one was pretty clear to me though, honestly, and it's kind of hard to explain, but it was a really fundamental shift in total frame of mind with everything. It was a totally different frame of mind in interpreting my communications and my relationships and how I felt about my training, how I felt about myself. I mean, it was such a just a fundamental shift that I really, there's no way that it could have been anything else. That said, teasing it apart on the other way around in terms of, having been able to identify that I was having increased anxiety and depressive symptoms, that I don't know that even would have been possible, because I also think that was a little bit of a gradual enough increase that would have been really hard to tease apart. And the other thing is it takes your body a while to adjust to all of these things. So once you start a new one, you got to give it a few months to figure out, how it's going to affect your cycle, how it's going to affect your physiology. And I mean, journaling, keeping really good notes in your training diary. I mean, all of these things are really, really important. And again, it's a tricky thing. There's no rubric for this. There's no protocol that says, okay, if you're on this for 3 months and you feel these things and this is happening, it really is so subjective and so individual. It's just something you got to dive in and do the work and figure it out for yourself.
I have to say PSA on this. So my wife, when she was 29, she had a stroke, and they did all these tests, and the only risk factor was birth control. So people should know that birth control does increase your risk of a stroke. I think with Yaz, with certain birth control, she was on orthotricycline, but with Yaz, they actually had a lawsuit around it. And the important thing to know about a stroke, and this is with anyone too, with older, everyone should know this. If you can get in within the 2 hours of when your stroke first happens, they have a drug called TPA, and you can be pretty successful. Once you get out of that window, you start to like either that you don't administer the TPA, or they have to do this crazy thing with my wife because we were out of the window where they did they put this catheter in at her hip and went all the way up to her brain and released the TPA only where it was. But Reno had one of the only places in the nation at this time that had this kind of skill. So please Google signs and symptoms of a stroke. Maybe Tucker can put this in. But a couple things, like if you see it's the smile, doing your fingers like a thumb to every finger on both hands. And if you can only do that on one hand and not the other hand, go in and see a doctor. This is also usually paired with a headache, blurred vision. There's a whole bunch of other ones, but basically you can stick your tongue out and move it. If my wife has a headache, she takes aspirin every day for the rest of her life because we can't prove that it was birth control, but she had zero other risk factors. They did bubble test, all these crazy things to her. But we do the things with the fingers right away. We do smiles because she was completely paralyzed one side of her body. Pretty severe. It was like a 10 out of 13 for those doctors who know it. But she fully recovered, which was lucky. She still has a little bit of problems with her left hand, but just everyone, because probably everyone has someone on birth control, and everyone knows someone who is an older person, that if you get in quick, it's really important. And so much so that some hospitals in your area might have a stroke center or a stroke team. If you do have someone that might be a risk group, I would actually research to see which is the hospital we should go to. And also call ahead, at least at our Renown in Reno, they had a stroke team. And if they knew that a stroke team they had a rapid response stroke team, and they would assemble and get all those people together when you're in the ambulance or when you're on the way there, because minutes matter on this. So those are kind of things to be aware of just in general. I think everyone should be aware of.
Yeah. And one last thing to add on this too, and sorry everybody if it's a bit scary saying this sort of stuff too, but birth control, at least from all signs pointing after working with fertility specialists, was the cause of 7 years of infertility for us too. So so it was really, really tough, and it's caused a lot of health ramifications for my wife too. So it's definitely a very individual choice, and it's one where you have to kind of, like you said, Amber, right? You have to weigh the benefits and look at what could happen, what is happening, and just stay heads up throughout the whole thing. Because even though we're all about performance on this podcast and becoming a faster cyclist, which is definitely, what we drive toward, at the same time, that should never come at the cost of health, right? So, which is why you brought up all of those other things that there's you were riding and your riding was itself over here, but it's not worth any other costs. So,
right. And this is, so take home messages, talk to your doctor about all of your options and understand that you do have options, and whatever options that you're seriously considering, have a really frank conversation with your doctor about what you do, your training level, what your concerns are. Ask about the side effects, ask about the things that you need to be looking out for. Be really, really communicative with your doctor about how you are feeling, any side effects you are experiencing, so that you can work together to find a good solution for you. I mean, I do know women who have cycles that are just all over the map, and birth control is a godsend for them, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to train with regularity. Women who manage pain from endometriosis. I mean, there's a lot of really, really good, profoundly impactful reasons to use birth control, but they are not there's no free lunch. I mean, bone density is a huge concern. Fertility is a huge concern. Stroke is, I'm so glad you brought that up, Nate. That's a big one. And we know that, in some cases athletes can be prone to DVT and things like that. So we really, really, this is a really big personal health issue as much as it is a performance issue. But there's no free lunch on this one. It's going to affect you one way or the other. It's just a matter of how it affects you as an individual, and how that kind of weighs out in a balance.
Well, I'm glad you're here to talk about it, Amber. I mean, clearly the three of us can't talk about it, but then also it's not very commonly discussed too. So
no, and it's a shame that there isn't more research around it too. It would be really great to have a better mechanistic understanding of how these things work. It is complicated. It's really complicated, but it is good to talk about.
Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. And this is exciting that we're going to have Amber with us now on these remote podcasts and
forever.
I mean, this is the new normal. So we'll see how long this goes, but we're excited to keep doing it. Hopefully we can get it live, but once again, tune in via YouTube so you can see it there. If not, then you can get it through the podcast. Once again, if the audio quality, this is our first crack at going through with this whole setup. So the audio quality, video quality isn't quite there. Please forgive us. We are committed to constant improvement, so we'll get better every week.
2 things. I hope this recorded.
Me too. If not, take another crack at it. Restart now.
Second, in the forum and on YouTube, please say if you like this, because when it does go back to normal, if you like this setup, I think we nailed it. Everyone, just y'all. But say if you like this, because if we do, I would love to have Amber on forever.
Yes.
And
we could talk about periods all the time. It's gonna be amazing.
I can't wait. No one talks about it. We should. It's I think it's a competitive advantage for our podcast.
For sure.
Literally. So anyways, give us feedback on this. And Chad, I think you're just backlit. We should fix that.
Me too.
I want to see your
to bring in some light for me.
Yeah, it's going to have to be a different room. We're done. Are we done with the podcast?
No, we can do light. I'm front lit right now. No, this is all part of the podcast.
What do I do with my hands?
Constant improvement. We can keep tweaking our setup, which will be awesome. So cool. Let us know.
Absolutely. Let us know down below. If you're watching, please give us a thumbs up. That helps the video a ton. Check out TrainerRoad and stay tuned. And we will talk to you all next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Stay safe.
Thanks, guys.